And apparently the only people who are looking at this are sort of rampaging leftists who want to tear the whole system down. And I don't want to tear the whole system down. I want to continue benefiting from the amazing system we have.
Hello and welcome to the More Freedom Foundation podcast. I am Murray, in charge of podcasting, and in charge of politics is Robert Morse. How are you this time?
Oh, not bad at all, Rory. How you doing?
I'm just very worried about the More Freedom Foundation, Rob.
Why?
There isn't really much happening at the minute. It feels like the 20s is going to be one of those decades where weeks happen, Rob. There's not much happening out there.
It's true. Things are really relaxed, and there's really not much to talk about. It's a real issue we're facing this year, especially in the new Trump administration, where it's all sort of boredom and business as usual. So there's really nothing to talk about. It's hard.
But is there like some small part of the government that was set up at around after the recession in 2008 that probably don't really need anymore? I think it's one of the few things they're actually doing is trying to modernize it. Would you say?
Yeah, sure. Like, what Trump and Elon Musk are doing is just a really minor, low key governmental reform efforts. I'll be honest, Ray, I can't sustain this for very much longer. The facts are that Donald Trump and his I don't know, I kind of want to use the term consigliere because it sounds kind of mafia like. But, Trump and his strange anarchist-in-chief, Elon Musk, are dismantling large swaths of the U.S. federal government. It seems like pretty much anything, as long as it's not defense-related.
I thought some defense stuff got affected, or was that things that were like adjacent to... What is it? U.S. aid, apparently. Quite often,
Donald
U.S.
Trump
aid was used as a front to maybe do some CIA stuff, and that's now got a knock-on effect.
That is a very large and controversial question that we are intentionally avoiding this week.
Okay.
Right? And unquestionably, the United States DOGE, or Department of Governmental Efficiency, Elon
Apparently,
Musk's
the government is referring to it as doggy. So.
Oh, interesting. Good to know. Good to know. Doggy. Is definitely targeting USAID. Presumably, they'll have plans for the State Department. Diplomacy. USAID, I would say, comes under more the category of diplomacy. There are certainly some USAID programs have been used for more nefarious purposes.
Didn't
or more
Kennedy
flatly
set it up?
Imperial purposes. USAID goes back to the 1960s, yes. Though, of course, there were certainly aid programs before that, and there will be aid programs after that. USAID is a tremendously complex, tremendously large issue. No, still very much is, in fact, that I don't feel up to tackling, frankly, quite yet. So what I do want to tackle this week is one part, and I think that's really the appropriate way to tackle these Elon Musk, Donald Trump reforms, is going one agency at a time and focusing on what it is they are stripping away. And I think today we'll be focusing on the Cfpb, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And this, I think, is one of the most important things that they're doing. It's being overlooked. And I think that's kind of the point of doing all of this stuff all at once, to keep, there's the Steve Bannon quote that's being used everywhere, and why should we be different? He said he would, the plan is to flood the zone with poop. He used a different word, to flood the zone with just so much mess that the official news media and liberals can't keep up. I think it's beneficial to just spend an hour, as we will today, talking about just one slice of the federal government and what's being done away with here, and how valuable it is. More broadly speaking, like the idea of cutting away and getting rid of pieces of government is always attractive, and is always a good idea in the broader sense. Like, we should absolutely not have immortal programs. We should not have agencies and programs and initiatives that just sort of go on forever, become immortal because somebody thought it was a good idea at one point. And I would say that some of the stuff that Elon Musk and Donald Trump are cutting definitely comes under that category. Stuff that should not exist, that actually should not be continued. what's crucial here, and is not very surprising when you consider that it's a tech guy and a bunch of 19-year-olds who appear to be doing a lot of the
There's
work
some
here.
people in their early 20s, Rob.
Sorry, I apologize. I apologize. Who actually have no concept of how anything works. It's become now a daily laugh riot. The things that Musk posts about that he simply doesn't understand. I think last week he was going off on the idea that, oh my God, we've discovered millions of social security numbers and that are being sent money and da da da. And then if you looked,
I think it
actually,
was
there's
dead people were being given millions and stuff.
yeah, and then you look and see that there's like actually a 2015 government report that notices this problem, and it was largely resolved, and it's actually nothing. They just don't know what they're doing very fundamentally.
And the other thing is, isn't there also a department of inefficiency trying to cut down on waste and all the rest? So now there's two of them essentially.
I'm sure. Well, so there's not just one. I mean, there's the Office of the Inspectorate General. It's a whole class of government worker that I believe most agencies have one, or they'll be named different things. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, fighting against governmental inefficiency is one of the main things that government does. Like there are multiple officials that have that, and as I pointed out in a short. Part of the reason why, well, there's the main reason why Trump and Musk are doing nothing on the Pentagon is because they don't want to. And Elon Musk gets a lot of his money from the Pentagon, so he doesn't,
Well, that's
doesn't actually.
the meme I keep hearing. It's like, if you want to cut down several billion, just cut the SpaceX and Tesla grants they're getting.
Well, I think that'd be a really bad idea because I think both of those are actually serving pretty great social goods. Elon Musk and SpaceX essentially is the only worthwhile part of our space program at this point. But they aren't cutting defense or looking into defense at all because they don't want to, but also because it's the Defense Department is the only department of the government that has never bothered to complete an audit. They've tried multiple times
Has it
and
been
they
like
have
7 years
failed.
in a row that they've failed?
Yeah, they have failed. It's essentially, it's easy to cut all the other parts of the government because it was transparent, because all of the information
Because they
about
played by the rules?
exactly all of the information about these programs was publicly available on the internet. So it's easy for Musk's turn of team of teenagers and early 20 somethings, as you point out, to go find out, what a program is and look at it, read a quick description and say, that doesn't need to exist anymore. Can't do that for the Pentagon because the Pentagon's never actually passed an audit.
Okay.
It is a fundamentally flawed project on a lot of levels. I've been saying for years, if you really want to intelligently cut the government, what you need are people who know the government to do that. And that is not what is on offer through Doge. The specific process that is being used against the CFPB is not entirely Doge related, or rather it's harder to see the connection between, Doggy and the
Inefficiencies?
what's happening to the what's being done to the CFPB, because it's pretty clear that they had a very clear plan that's unfolding in just a week for the entire roll-up of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is a relatively newly established bureau.
I think 2011?
Yeah, it was established put in the Dodd-Frank Act, which was the big response to the 2008 financial crisis.
Wall
Yes.
Street reform and
Yep, and the
consolidation, is it?
CFPB started work in 2011, interestingly, under Elizabeth Warren before she went on to become a senator. This was actually Elizabeth Warren's brainchild, the CFPB. So basically, it's what's happening to all of these agencies is troubling and disturbing. But the fact that the CFPB in particular seems to have been sort of extirpated root and branch almost immediately.
Oh, so it's just completely pulled out?
I mean, they're terminating the lease on the headquarters of this place.
How many people would have worked for this facility? Like, would it be thousands or
It
hundreds?
seems
or?
to be about 1,500, and that's a kind of a crucial point here for the amount of extraordinarily important work that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau did. It didn't really cost much money. And this was a subject of some contention. It does not appear to actually take much money from the U.S. Congress. It actually was funded to the tune of $500 million, which is not a lot of money.
Well, especially for a country. Like, countries treat billions and trillions like you or I would spend hundreds and thousands. Do you know what I mean? It's just what a country does.
Exactly. And this money seems to have come by the choice of the legislature directly from the Federal Reserve. So it is not actually vulnerable to the appropriations process in any way by design. And conservatives really hated that. And I don't know if I think it's probably unfair to say that conservatives really hate consumer protection. The simple fact is that Wall Street really hates consumer protection. And it's really significant in this supposedly broad-based, we're going to, we're getting rid of all these inefficiencies, we're throwing out everything. I think it's really telling that the most comprehensive just nuking of an agency that we've seen is probably the one that Wall Street hated the most.
Okay.
And I think that tells you a lot about what these rampaging outsiders, Donald Trump and Elon Musk, are really up to. It's fundamentally serving the same people who brought us the financial crisis in 2008, the same people who have created a U.S. economy where housing costs and healthcare costs and education costs are out of control. And I think one reason to focus on the CFPB is because it shines such a bright light on what's really going on here, rather than allowing people to fall into these fantasies of, oh, we're doing something principled here. No, we are clearing the ground for more Wall Street abuses. And that's very clearly what's happening here because, of course, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was designed to deal with the last huge crisis brought about by Wall Street abuses.
Is this not very worrying? Because I hear a lot of experts saying that we didn't really learn the lessons from the last financial crisis. So does it feel like this is a sticking plaster that's sort of preventing disaster that's now just been ripped off?
100%.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So this is the thing. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has spent the past decade in the courts, as it has under each of the Democratic administrations. I spent the morning reading right-wing critiques of the CFPB, and I think it's accurate. Right-wing critics are accurate to say that under Democratic administrations, under the final years of the Obama, I guess the whole second term of Obama, 2011 to 2016, and then definitely under the Biden administration, especially under Rohit Chopra, who I believe became in charge in 2021 or 2022 or thereabouts, dramatically expanded its powers. But I think if you're not a Republican fully bought and paid for by Wall Street, I think you can say that it's good for a consumer watchdog to be dramatically expanding its powers.
Do they prevent like laws that could be misinterpreted from happening, or are they going after companies to make sure they're not doing like incredibly irresponsible financial?
The point of the CFPB is it's in the name. It is the protection of consumers, and what it provided that was tremendously valued was the ability for any consumer to file a complaint with the CFPB and say, this company has done this to me and it needs to remunerate me. It needs to pay me back. It's stolen money from me. It has swindled me. It has taken advantage of me in some respect. The CFPB, though, I read an article yesterday just talking about all these individuals who would get, as little as $400 back or $17 back, because without the CFPB, there's really nothing keeping those kinds of abuses by large companies from happening. There's a large architecture of financial regulation in the United States. There is the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Commodity Futures Trade Commission, the International Trade Commission. There's the Federal Trade Commission. All of these agencies do different things. What was recognized in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, where one of the main exacerbating problems behind 2008 was recognized to be the fact that all kinds of people were being lured into mortgages by financial institutions that they had no business having.
Yeah.
That's interesting. This is often like skewed from a right-wing perspective, like, oh man, they had no business borrowing this money. And actually that right-wing critique is absolutely correct. And what the CFPB is meant to do is to stand in that process and say, wait a second, these kinds of abusive mortgages should not exist, and sort of stopping the process before people get into a situation where people are losing their homes or there's a systemic financial crisis. The view of the Republicans who've always hated the CFPB, I guess, is that 2008 was a good thing, that banks should be able to.
Well, some people did make money out of it.
That's, I guess, the rationale of people who hate the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau is that I guess it was good that the banks were able to make all of these insane loans and at incredible cost to the individuals who took out these loans, and it's, essentially zero cost eventually to most of the banking institutions and executives. And so that's sort of the thing about the CFPB is it is weird, and this was litigated extensively across the 2010s and 2020s. It is weird in that it was set up to be outside of the appropriations process and sort of getting its money directly from the Federal Reserve. It is weird in that it has sort of one director that it used to be could only be fired for like cause by the president. The conservative Supreme Court changed that in 2020 and essentially said that the president can remove a commissioner or
at will.
I don't know, chairman or whatever his name is, for any cause. And that's what happened to Rohit Chopra,
the director.
Yeah, the director. And that's what happened to Rohit Chopra in the first days of the Trump administration. He was technically supposed to be like a Federal Reserve chairman that would stay there or what have you, but Donald Trump instantly fired him because the Supreme Court gave him the ability to do that. But it was intentionally set up as this sort of a little bit outside, a little more immune to Congress. To be clear, it was set up by the Congress.
Because it's supposed to be independent.
Yes, because they acknowledged the limitations of their own power. It became very clear, certainly by 2010, when Dodd-Frank was being put together, that the bankers and the large financial institutions at the heart of the financial crisis were going to suffer no consequences. By 2010, it was very clear that this simply,
they weren't going to do an Iceland.
They weren't going to do, nobody was going to jail. Actually, these people, very few of them were going to even get their bonus structures interfered with at all. So the CFPB was like this barely, like there are a lot of things in Dodd-Frank, and I think there's probably a good case to be made that all told, like all of Dodd-Frank together is kind of burdensome or what have you. But that's because we didn't do what we should have done. This, like the fact that Dodd-Frank is this big sort of burdensome, complicated reaction to 2008 is because we didn't do what we should have done, which was throw bankers in jail and break up the banks. That's what we should have done. This is, as you said, that sort of plaster on the breaching dam. This is what the CFPB was like, okay, like clearly we're not going to punish anybody who should be punished. We're not going to change anything fundamental about this system, but we're going to set up this bureau that makes it a little bit harder for big banks to swindle the American consumer. And gosh darn it, does everybody in the right-wing leaning, or at least the elite level right-wing leaning space hate the CFPB. Like they just hate everything about this really, really minor thing that was imposed on Wall Street in response to Wall Street blowing up the entire world economy. And honestly, like blowing up our sense of how economics works. We've talked about on this podcast how really nobody has any idea how economics works since 2008. So yeah, like the Wall Street not only just blew up the world economy, it blew up our very understanding of how basic economics works. And one of the only things they were asked to put up with after this was the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And now they've killed it. And yeah, that is pretty scary.
What way does this body like influence banks or whatever? Like, has it stopped a lot, or is it just, what prevents banks from doing X or Y because of this organization?
Well, it has very serious rulemaking capacities. One of the very interesting things that Rohit Chopra had done, this was the director of the CFPB, had put in place a rule saying that a really positive rule, essentially saying that medical debt could no longer count towards credit scores, I believe. So credit scores are like, it's funny, we talk about in the United States, oh, there's this terrifying prospect that the authoritarian Chinese Communist Party is going to start doing social credit scores that like determine things. Whereas in the United States, we've had this, we have a credit report that for decades has determined whether you can borrow money, whether you can own a car, whether you can own a house, this, that, and the other thing.
But I think a lot of wealthy countries have something similar.
Yes, yeah. So I'm not saying it's necessarily an evil thing.
Yeah.
It's just
a
kind
bit
of silly.
hypocritical.
Yeah, it's a bit silly to call China evil for having the same thing we have, judged perhaps somewhat differently. And the CFPB, my understanding is that the CFPB was the agency putting forward a rule saying that you could no longer count medical debt in those calculations, which is a tremendously
Beneficial.
important step towards, I mean, obviously, in a perfect world, we wouldn't have a medical system that imposed hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt on people, for the inconvenience of getting sick. But at least this shift would allow, basically, it would incentivize, it would reduce the level of punishment on people who did end up in that situation for the terrible, terrible decision of getting ill. That rule is now unlikely to be implemented. And the key thing here is, before 2008 financial crisis, there were a number of agencies like the FDIC, the Federal Reserve itself, a number of other agencies that I can't recall, but I read an article saying there were 7 separate agencies that did the things that the CFPB did. But the Federal Reserve wasn't really that concerned about consumers. The Federal Reserve's concern was the stability of the entire system, making sure that the dollar was secure, that sort of thing. The FDIC was about making sure banks didn't go under, like on a granular level. It's the FDIC is the guys that come in to wrap up your bank or insure your deposits, that kind of thing. So nobody was really focused on like the basics of regulating the mortgage market, regulating the consumer financial credit stuff, like the credit card companies. And now, of course, as the crypto environment steps up more and more, Rohit Chopra was attempting to, I think, quite logically, grow the footprint of the CFPB in that direction.
Yeah.
This is, since 2011, those consumer protection approaches that those other agencies took that were inadequate, judged to be inadequate, like those have all atrophied because those other institutions are like, oh, finally, the FDIC is like, we can focus on, insuring banks and wrapping up banks. And the Fed is like, oh, finally, we don't have to worry about this consumer protection stuff. We can just focus on what the hell is going on with the repo market or whatever. So none of those agencies do this stuff anymore. I think you can make a stronger or weaker argument that the CFPB had overstepped its bounds. I think those are kind of weak arguments, as I've already said. But basically, like the CFPB is definitely in charge of regulating I don't know, it's got to be over $1 trillion mortgage market in the United States. I mean, there are a few things more important in the U.S. economy than real estate and mortgages on real estate. And the CFPB is the institution that's meant to make sure that people aren't getting abused by these mortgage companies. But don't worry, Ray, there's no recent example of consumers being abused by mortgage companies.
That's
never happened before, except of course for the 2008 financial crisis. So the CFPB it can be a little confusing because they do a lot of different things and are promulgating new rules that are an attempt to regulate other aspects of things. But fundamentally, like, they're the guys you go to if your mortgage company is abusing you or swindling you. And now they're not there anymore.
Have you noticed anything change bank-wise now that this is gone, or is it too early to notice them?
It is way too
things?
early.
Oh, okay.
We're recording this February 19th. It is exactly a week since they shut down their sort of complaint receipt, and it's less than 2 weeks since they stopped all their work and stopped pursuing the I don't know if it would be criminal or at least the enforcement actions that they were attempting. As recently as December, there was a list. As recently as December of 2024, they were initiating enforcement actions against Walmart, Google, other really large companies. And now that's all over. It's all just gone.
Do you know much about Mike Mulvaney?
Mike Mulvaney would have been the CFPB head during the first Trump
Oh,
administration.
it's just what sort of character is he? And, is he a good, trustworthy hand, or does he consider it to be a joke?
He's considered well. You see, there's different levels of joke. Marie. There's Trump one joke, which is people who were sort of had some respectability that sort of tended to tarnish themselves and end their time with Trump vastly tarnished, or at least or falling out with him in a major way. And I think Mick Mulvaney is sort of a Trump one kind of person.
So how did the Trump administration treat it the first time round?
That was a more interesting, well, less interesting, but much more official standard Republican way of dealing with the CFPB. I don't think anybody expected the CFPB to break new ground under Donald Trump or under any Republican administration. That's just, it sort of falls into that class of the NLRB or other, so National Labor Relations Board, or a class of agencies that Democrats want to do things with, and Republicans usually want to staff with a member of the industry that they're supposed to be adversarially regulating. So the CFPB became sort of a proving ground for Mick Mulvaney, who became a very significant figure in the first Trump administration. In the office of the president, there is this thing called the OMB, which is also important for the story of what's happening to the CFPB right now. Sorry if we're falling into too many acronyms. The Office of Management and Budget prepares the president's budget and can be used by a more active president to sort of oversee, if you want to put it positively, or, screw with, if you want to put it less positively, the way that agencies are run, and to make sure that agencies fit the vision of the current president. So Mick Mulvaney, he was at the CFPB, and then he became Trump's manager of OMB for most of Trump's time in power. It's a surprising amount of durability for the first Trump administration. And essentially what they did with the CFPB was they sort of put it into stasis. They didn't try to fire everybody. They didn't try to shut down all the programs, but they slow rolled everything. And certainly during the Trump administration, there was ongoing litigation over whether the head of the CFPB could have the amount of power over, essentially was as hard to fire as it was. And in 2020, the Supreme Court ended up deciding that the CFPB director should be a little easier to fire. So just like not much happened under the Trump administration. And in the normal course of events, that's what we would have expected, is that the agency didn't grow. The agency was discouraged from pursuing any blockbuster enforcement actions against Google or Walmart, but largely was allowed to continue doing its work. And
so still acted as it prevented people from doing anything crazy. It was like, it's still there. It's still got some teeth, even if it's been defined a bit. So it kept everyone behaving a bit.
Exactly. And then during the Biden administration, which essentially launched with the Supreme Court in its 2020 decision, had the option to really say, to make a much broader sort of declaration about whether or not the CFPB was allowable, whether it was a worthwhile thing. But they ended up just going on narrowly saying, okay, the president can fire the director here and then let the CFPB do its work relatively unmolested. And then actually in 2024, and this is kind of surprising, in 2024, the CFPB looked very secure because in a 7-2 majority opinion written by Clarence Thomas, I believe, one of the most conservative justices on a conservative court, they said, actually, Congress has pretty wide jurisdiction. And if they wanted to set it up like this, that's fine, which kind of demolished the arguments of conservative Republican Wall Street opponents of the CFPB. This just happened a few months ago in 2024. So it looked like the CFPB was super secure. And Rohit Chopra had taken that 2020 decision and then the 2024 decision and really ran with it, and had really, I think this is actually a legitimate critique by the sort of right-wing types that, and this will often happen in both directions, is that in the lame duck period, a president will push forward a whole bunch of things that serve their priorities and that the other party might dislike. And Rohit Chopra, it appears, certainly did that. And it could have been expected that, those enforcement actions would have been slow-rolled or thrown out or different approaches. What nobody expected was what started happening in February to the CFPB. Initially, and I think this has been done with the USAID as well, which is the Trump administration the Trump administration doesn't even really bother to appoint anybody to be in charge. Or no, actually, that's not true.
Kind of mothball it nearly.
Well, they're definitely trying to mothball it. Actually, no, I did read somewhere that there is somebody proposed to run the CFPB, but they're not even bothering to wait for the appointments procedure. Initially, the CFPB was given to Scott Bessent, the Treasury's secretary. And then on February 7th, the new OMB guy, whose name is Russell Vought. This is a very important figure, Russell Vought, who has been put in charge of the OMB, it's kind of interesting. Doggy is like this big, flashy, loud Elon Musk and his teenagers and early 20-somethings doing loud, stupid stuff. Putting Russell Vought in at OMB is almost where the real action is happening. I almost wonder if there's a conscious strategy here to let Elon Musk generate all kinds of lawsuits and end up in huge battles over big institutions like the USAID. Russell Vought comes in and ninjas really important things to death.
So he's the one you should be keeping an eye on?
Absolutely. And I think the sort of hashtag resistance lib media is actually getting this one right. People are focusing on what a sinister figure Russell Vought is, but I think it is easier to it's definitely a lot easier to be distracted by Elon Musk's shenanigans, whereas putting Russell Vought in at the OMB. So who is Russell Vought? He was groomed. It's funny. I look at pictures of this guy, and I was like, he's got what, mid-60s? He's like 3 years older than I am. So he was actually too young, I'd say, in the first Trump administration to be put in charge of anything. But it appears that he had a sort of junior role at the Office of Management and Budget under Mick Mulvaney. He's a hardcore ideologue, and it's interesting just realizing, frankly, I mean, why mince words? These people are terrible Christians. Like, it is extraordinary, like, the amount of effort and energy they put into billing themselves as good Christians.
Christian nationalists, that sounds sinister.
Yes. But like, what exactly composes their Christianity when all they really do in practice is make the world safer for banks? It's honestly like, I mean, I don't know.
And rich people.
And rich people, right? It's like, I am not a Christian, but I absolutely come from a Christian background and have, read selections of the Bible and consider myself sort of immersed in that general sort of Western philosophy of attempting to do good in the world. And I mean, these people are just evil. Like, their whole point is making Wall Street richer. They're gross. They're disgusting. There was this sort of like, I get offended. Like, I can appreciate a greedy person. I can appreciate a person who, there's enough of a love of capitalism in me that I like a good hard-nosed business person. But to clothe themselves in sort of the language of Christianity and the idea that the Bible justifies their filthy greed is quite offensive to me. I don't know.
But I thought Jesus loved the bankers and the moneylenders.
Yeah, famously, yeah, he went into the temple to sit down and calculate interest rates with them. That's how that worked, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, that's pretty sure. Hello.
And it's very easy for a rich man to get into the kingdom of heaven.
Exactly. It's something about a camel's asshole, right? It's
not quite how I remember.
No? Okay, I don't know. Something along those lines. But anyway, so you recall we talked about this book a couple episodes back. So Russell Vought is from sort of the same milieu as Kevin D. Roberts, these guys who love to talk about the West and
What's
Christianity.
The name of the book?
Oh, it was Dawn's Early Light, Taking Back Washington to Save America. And they are absolutely the Project 2025 people. I don't know. I think Vought had his own institution, but it's sort of part of the galaxy of organizations.
Okay, I kind of got absorbed.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's an independent organization and an independent place for rich people to send money, to send bribes, for these people pimping out Jesus Christ.
Speakers' fees.
What's that?
They're
Yes,
speakers'
yeah.
fees.
Oh, well, there's speakers' fees, there's all kinds of things for these people who are going to pimp out Jesus Christ for J.P. Morgan. Yeah, that's a good way to describe Russell Vought. He's a Jesus Christ pimp for J.P. Morgan. So
Hmm.
anyway, he's got these organizations. He's part of formatting Project 2025, and really his most vicious, and he also does a bunch of organizations around critical race theory or this, that, and the other thing. We're here to defeat wokeness and make JP Morgan richer. It's kind of extraordinary. It's just so sleazy, I think, is what I'm trying to get at here. Russell Vought, acting head of the OMB, where he's no doubt doing a whole number of other things. And what's kind of extraordinary is just the simplicity. It was nicely laid out in one of the complaints. The simplicity of what he's doing here is like, yeah, supposedly the Trump administration has nominated somebody to eventually be approved as the head of the CFPB. But by the time that happens, there's just not going to be anything left there. So on February 7th, Russell Vought became acting head. On February 8th, he essentially shut down all work at the CFPB. Essentially said, you're to
There's
stop.
something quite depressing if you're at home listening you can do is go to the website and you get a 404.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Jeez. Yeah, so February 8th, he shuts down all work. February 10th, I think he just closes the building. By February 11th, he canceled most of their contracts with vendors. The CFPB actually has a whole bunch of money in the bank,
Mm-hmm.
and he's trying to give it back to the Federal Reserve. The CFPB is
Okay.
funded by quarterly dispersals from the Federal Reserve, and he's simply saying we don't want that money. And he's trying to give back the money that they already have back. There are, of the 1,500 people who work for the CFPB, not all of them can be instantly fired. He already fired all the term employees, all the people who did not have sort of civil service protections. He's already fired all of them. It'll no doubt be a job of months or years to fire all the people who do have civil service protections, who do have long-term jobs with the federal government. But yeah, and he's apparently trying to he's closed the headquarters, he shut down the website, and he's just trying to I don't know who they're leasing it from, whether it's a private company or the General Services Administration, but he's trying to rip up the lease and essentially deprive the CFPB of a place to work.
Has this, like, in American history, has something like this happened before where they've just aggressively gone after a certain branch of the government or an affiliated independent organization?
Yes, but it's on a more case by case.
Mm-hmm. It's like they've just said one day this branch has sort of lived its life. It needs to be folded into something else, that sort of thing.
Well, sure, and there's all kinds of there's recent examples of sweeping reorganizations. One that I really hate, like the Department of Homeland Security, is a post 9/11 innovation. That really has added no value, but it was supposed to make things more efficient by taking a bunch of functions from a bunch of other different areas and putting it under the Department of Homeland Security. So reorganization certainly happens. What this is actually much akin to, and I think explicitly what Trump and the Project 2025 people are trying to do, is get back to the period before civil service protections. It's called the spoils system, which is famously the 19th century America and the United Kingdom were extraordinarily corrupt. And with every single election in the United States, I know this worked this way, every post office worker, and in the 19th century, post office workers were a much larger slice of the federal government than they are today. Every post office worker could be fired and replaced with a new election. This is obviously an incredible source of corruption. We do not want jobs for your voters to be why democratic decisions are being made. And in the United Kingdom and the United States, swiftly followed or perhaps preceded by some other countries. Actually, yeah, I wonder, were they inspired by Prussia, maybe? I don't know. Basically said that, no, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to have a meritocracy in government work. We're going to have to take some exams, and if you pass the exams, then you're good enough and you get put on a list, and it's going to be very straightforward and not corrupt, and you're not going to, and that led, of course, to dramatically better government. However, that was a long time ago. That was 130 years ago, and nobody quite realizes why those choices were made anymore. So people focus on, oh gosh, it's so hard to hire and fire people for the government. Like, yes, it's difficult to hire and fire people for the government because we do not want people to be hired and fired for political purposes. We do not want the spoils system that made U.S. government in the 1800s an international watchword for extreme corruption.
Do you not want people to feel not content but safe in their job, so they actually focus on it instead of constantly trying to look for other work?
Yes, you definitely want that, and I think there's also, but I mean, I'm not some kinda fundamentalist about this. I still have serious problems with the idea of public sector unions. That bothers me. I still think that we do make it too hard to fire people who are bad at government work. I think I agree with that. Wholesale destruction of entire departments is not the appropriate,
Well,
yeah,
I think
like,
it's very much
mhm.
a baby with the bathwater. Like, I'm sure there's going to be something reduced that is of some benefit, but it feels like you're massively damaging America and potentially the world with uh, this operation.
Well, it's the CFPB in particular. It basically it clears the field for massive Wall Street greed. On top of that, the crypto stuff that the Trump administration is a huge fan of.
I think it's at around 3 trillion is invested in crypto at the minute, just to give people an idea.
Yeah, and it's all just this. It's quite transparently clearing the ground for another greed fantasia followed by another massive crisis. And like if you're someone who cares about the world system as it exists today, and I am one, 2008 was an incredible self-inflicted wound for American empire, and we're clearly just this is clearly just opening the space for yet another one, probably larger.
Because it's the fact that you hear people talking about 2008, but also that the AI bubble is very similar to the dot-com bubble as well. So, like, are we going to get two at once?
Yeah, well, get 2001 and 2008 at the same time.
Mm-hmm. And crypto in there just for something different.
Yeah. Yeah, and it just, it's,
Have you been following Nathan Tankus?
I have been following Nathan Tankus a bit, but it's hard to keep up with the pure pace of stuff he does.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, it's also the fact that it just seems to be potentially the world market may collapse because Musk and his cronies are just randomly pulling out cables and going through. He was saying that the software that a lot of I know this isn't quite the one we're talking about today, but the software can date back as far back as like the 60s. And you obviously need to have incredible information. I think a lot of it's a programming language, Cobalt.
So is this at the Treasury Department,
It's
or
hard to
where
know
is it?
because it feels
Yeah.
like every other day Musk and them are broken into another department and doing all sorts. So
Just
yeah,
sort of rampaging around.
so it's all very scary because we're going to have that on top of it. Like this could be because he says basically he has nightmares, and ever since he went on the odd lots, he's had a lot of like professionals all around the world are now really scared.
Oh, I think as they should be. This is pure chaos, and it's the fruition of what's so frustrating about this is we've been conditioned by sort of 40 years of Reaganism in the United States to think this kind of thing is a good idea. I mean, people are angry about what's happening in the CFPB, but broadly, most Republicans and many more Democrats, certainly New York Democrats than you'd think, are kind of like, oh, well, that'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have this sense that has been beaten into us over the past 40 years that government is bad, government is bad, government is bad. And you know what? Government can be bad, but complete lack of government or anarchy sitting where government should be can be a lot worse.
But it's also the how much is reliant from the government compared to 100 years ago. Like, we talked before about, the early days of America and how, like, you'd lucky to be able to see an official from your state, let alone from, the country. While now there's just so much is reliant on it that I'm sure if you're a billionaire, it feels like, oh, I'm a self-made man and I can rely on myself. But this is sort of like terrifying.
Yeah, no,
What can unfurl from this?
What it's sort of a learned idiocy. Like we've lobotomized ourselves on the altar of market fundamentalism. One of the most extraordinary things I couldn't bring myself to open the article, but The Economist this week or last week The cover was "The War Against Regulation," and it was a lot of red tape being removed. And it's just like, that is your response to what is happening here? That is your response to like the $1 trillion mortgage market becoming completely unregulated? Is like, woo-hoo-hoo, look at the red tape's going away. This is going to be great. And it's like, no, this is going to be
But isn't
disastrous.
when you compare, the EU would say that America is too lax with its regulation. So the idea that's going to become a bit more off the rails is very concerning.
Yeah, and I mean, next time we're going to talk about Argentina, which I actually think is benefiting from some of this take an axe to government deregulatory approach. But the United States doesn't, we don't need any more of it. Thank you very much. And it's really incredibly frustrating and a testament to just how badly Biden and Harris effed up, or the whole Democratic Party effed up by picking Biden and Harris, that somehow at the end of 40 years of now like accelerating chaos and destruction wrought by our pro-business fundamentalism, we've now signed the government over to even more extreme pro-business fundamentalists.
It feels like it's sort of like they're doing what one group of billionaires want, and then another group and another group, but it's like they're all clashing. It's almost like there isn't one coherent plan happening. It's like 15's going on at once, and they're all sort of going to wreck each other, but destroy the average American as well. Like,
oh, I would disagree, actually. I think it's very coherent. It's all pushing in the same direction. It's all pushing in the same direction of destroying the New Deal and taking off any basic protections for the consumer, as we're seeing in the Cfpb, any basic regulation of things that businesses might want to do. Even if these protections are 100 years old, they're just being stripped away and stripped away and stripped away. And it's not a question of if this will lead to horrific financial crisis. It is a question of when. With Donald Trump's luck, it'll probably happen in like the first month of the new Democratic president's term. But yeah, it's really frustrating to watch because the lessons are so clear, and yet every piece of financial media, cable news media seems to be doing everything they can to ignore the incredibly clear lessons of the past 15 years or 16 years, 17 years since the financial crisis, or the past 45 years since Reagan was elected. The lessons are so clear, so obvious. And apparently the only people who are looking at this are sort of rampaging leftists who want to tear the whole system down. And I don't want to tear the whole system down. I want to continue benefiting from the amazing system we have. But it seems like everybody in finance and the Republican Party and most of the Democratic Party wants to drive us off this cliff of deregulation into 2008 plus. It's madness, Rory. It's madness.
is this something that Ronald Reagan would be horrified at? Because when you listen to him, it's like it feels like, when someone's died and then their legacy gets exaggerated, it feels almost like we're sort of going far too far, that he would be sort of horrified and try to bring things back.
Oh, I don't know about that. Yeah, no, I mean, I think Reagan was a team player. And he knew what his side was, he knew what his team was, and he wanted to go in that direction.
Okay.
And when he found who knows, when he found himself as president, he was one of the most extreme anti-Soviet politicians the United States ever had. But then when he became president and sort of saw his personal responsibility for the possibility of a nuclear holocaust, he changed his tune. So yeah, I mean, maybe, but no, I mean, if Reagan were president for this kind of insanity, maybe he would try to rein things in a bit. But if he were alive in a happy post-presidency, he'd probably be doing campaign rallies with Donald Trump. Because that's the thing here, is that part of the whole focus on Elon Musk is this veneer that Trumpism represents something new and radical. Trying to get rid of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is about as rock-ribbed a Mitt Romney, Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, standard Republican thing to do. It's not that much of a deviation. It is a more extreme version for sure, but it is the kind of thing. It's Ronald Reagan's wish list, really. And like Ronald Reagan would be the wrong viewpoint from which to take our period. And you know what? FDR probably didn't have the right answers for the 1970s either. You know, like FDR, a figure I've come to sort of be more and more impressed with as time goes on. Was not the right guy for the 1970s. Might be the right guy come around again now, but Ronald Reagan is not that.
Have you any hope for us?
I mean, things muddle along,
Mm-hmm.
and things could continue to muddle along.
Is it possible if something very badly happens, like within the next couple of months, they might try to undo a lot of this?
Yeah. Oh, I think there's some kind of really like impossible to ignore screw up, and a bit of a backpedaling seems kind of inevitable. I think USAID. There's been some pushback on that already. The PEPFAR, the only good thing that George W. Bush ever did, the U.S. Funding of HIV medications in Africa. Like I think that's probably been protected and restored. There's all kinds of little mini pushbacks. I do expect there will be a larger one, potentially. You brought up Nathan Tankus and his excellent reporting. Possibly, I mean, I think the main governor that everybody sort of expects is that if there's some kind of market instability generated by all this stuff, Trump and co. will back off pretty soon. The problem with the CFPB is that we can probably limp along before that next crisis for a year or two. So yeah, I think that at this point, the CFPB union has sued, and Russell Vought has been slowed down, but it's not a long-term solution by any measure. And this is what's happening across the federal government right now, is that the talented people who can find employment elsewhere are going and doing that, or will be in the coming months. And the people we wanted to fire out of these jobs anyway will be content to sit there and with their lawsuits for the next 3 years and probably walk back into their jobs in the next Democratic administration in 2029. But of course, they're not the people we wanted to be at these jobs, because all the talented go-getter types who are at these jobs will be working in the private sector. And that's sort of another, it is really, the past 40 years to some extent has been an exercise in Republicans and Democrats making the government dramatically worse and then complaining about how bad government is and using that as an excuse to make government dramatically worse. And it's a really terrible cycle that I guess the most hopeful thing I can say, Rory, is that maybe we've reached like the ridiculous limits of this. With Elon Musk and his teen core,
I'm
running
just kind of
around.
worried that like things will go bad. The Democrats are a bit like, well, we don't really need to change much because they can see how mad they are, and we can just be business as usual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I think that's the case, and that's what Biden and Harris were. They were Democrats being business as usual, and we can not change anything and squeak into power because Donald Trump is so bad. And I think that's the most likely result in 2028 as well. But gee, it'd be nice if they provided a real alternative.
Anyone in the Democratic Party you could see that could lead the next election?
Any of them.
Oh,
There's so
really?
many of them. Sure. There's so many options. They just need to actually advance a program that they can seem to believe in, and and that actually changes things. Kamala Harris does. I think it's time to admit that Kamala Harris is perhaps a uniquely bad politician and is not.
But I think it was basically like, I think it isn't accepted that she wouldn't have won, but it was like, there's nothing we can do right now. Joe Biden is just far too old.
What we should have done is a very abbreviated primary, which was absolutely possible.
Just have a incredibly short one?
Yes, an incredibly short primary would have been ideal, and would have produced somebody who could have beaten Donald Trump. I think that with a serious message that actually appeals to the majority of the American people, centered on real changes to things, not like, I think Kamala Harris was really famous for some program she had that it's like, well, we'll give you a tax break if you are somebody who benefited from a Pell Grant, a low-income scholarship, and you're starting a small business in like Albuquerque. I mean, it wasn't that exactly.
It
but
was just
like,
very specific.
just these like very tailored, like minor, like knob things. Like, no, like if you had a Democratic Party that had a reasonable, not full Bernie, but like reasonable program of tax hikes, and this is what we're going to do to make things cost less, housing, education, healthcare, they could rampage to power. But you need to have somebody who can credibly sell that, not Kamala Harris, who in 2020 was sort of running as Che Guevara, and in 2024 was running as Dick Cheney. And I mean, honestly,
Liz Cheney.
yeah, if anybody other than Joe Biden had been president, we'd be in the fifth year of a Democratic administration at this point.
Could you see a third party rising from all this mayhem?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, that's just not. It's just not
It's
how
not
the
that
US
bad.
Oh, it's definitely that mad. But no, I mean, I think we've had madder times without getting rid of the Republicans and the Democrats. And I think have we had madder times? Yeah, I think the 1960s still count as madder times.
Okay.
What needs to happen is that the Republicans, and it's happening, the Republicans and Democrats are changing in major ways. We haven't quite gotten to the point where they're changing into something with coherent policy objectives that they're actually going to pursue.
But it's good that they're trying to help, one of America's most neglected minorities, which is billionaires.
Yeah, Wall Street really needed a helping hand, and Project 25 is here to make it happen. It's Donald Trump and Elon Musk are here to make the wealthier wealthier. Because nobody's tried that before, Rory.
No one's tried that because America is quite a poor country, so it needs to help its business.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Need a hand up.
All right. Well, we'll catch you next time where we might be talking about a country that once was very wealthy and now isn't.
Indeed. Argentina.
The More Freedom Foundation is also available on YouTube and TikTok. Rob's Twitter is RobOLaw, and he's also written a book called Avoiding the British Empire, What It Was and How the US Can Do Better. And music provided by Kevin MacLeod.